Gathered friends, welcome to Bionicle Fanon Reviews, the show where I build, review, and showcase every single one of the fan-created, canonized Bionicle models over the entirety of Bionicle Generation 1's 10-year run. In 2005, the LEGO Group officially hosted Dark Hunter and Rahi canon contests, showcasing fan MOCs in official media like books. Even moving onwards all the way up to 2010, fan websites like BZ Power continued to host canon contests, enriching the world of Bionicle with new depictions, artwork, and builds. And even now, there's been a renaissance of canon contests. Thanks to TTV and sponsored by Greg Farshty, the original scribe of Bionicle, we have modern canonization contests depicting characters that we never thought would see the light of day and are still ongoing right now. Now, throughout the show, it is my own goal to own, build, review, and showcase every single fan-created canonized model created for Bionicle, and share these reviews with all of you. And while we mostly stick to canon models, there are a few rare exceptions which shine through. Fan MOCs depicting their versions of Bionicle characters, canon or otherwise, that are so exemplary that they deserve a review of their own. For every Bionicle Fanon review, I rank the builds by 4 key points. Number 1 is posability. Can the model get in good poses? Can it support its own weight? And can it hold the weight of its own weapons, or is it just falling over? Number 2 is building techniques. Is the model just regurgitating stuff from existing LEGO sets, or is it trying something new and doing that well as using unique parts usages? Number 3 is overall aesthetics. How good does the model look completely agnostic of storyline relevance, and is it generally aesthetically appealing? And finally, number 4 is believability in universe, which means that does the storyline given to the model by the Bionicle story team make sense given how the model is built, and does the model scale well next to some representative samples from the Bionicle universe? And with that, let's consider these 4 points and more as we jump into a brief story and lore explanation of today's featured build. This time we'll be taking a look at the third of WombatCombatPictures' Great Beings characters. Now, of course, famously, the Great Beings have never actually had a physical appearance in canon Bionicle lore, and I do kind of wish it stays that way. But for non-canon, anything is possible. And so we have one of the Great Beings. This is the Great Being of Conflict, Heremus. Alright, so here we have WombatCombatPictures' Great Being of Conflict, Heremus. The character in the Bionicle story does not actually look like this. We do not know what they look like. For all we know, they do look like this. But this is really just a creation by WombatCombatPictures to represent what it might look like, which I think is a cool what-if scenario, if not maybe the most accurate depiction of mine that I had for Great Beings. This one certainly is pretty cool looking, and definitely worth taking a look at. So let's start off all these reviews by taking a look at posability. And so for posability's sake, let's tilt this down a little bit so we can focus on the legs and move our way upwards. So first of all, you'll notice that the legs are mounted fairly normally. This actually thankfully has a friction CCBS add-on joint, so there is a lot of friction here, so you don't really have to worry about it falling over too much. You can get this all moved around because it is using the CCBS joints like so you have a pretty good range of articulation. Once you bend the leg out a little bit further than this, the armor piece will start to flex a little bit, but overall it is pretty good in terms of being able to be moved around, and the feet of course can be rotated basically just like normal because they're just standard Toa Mata feet with a few system add-ons. Moving onwards, he technically has waist articulation, although the way this is mounted is honestly a little bit strange. I don't even know if it was intentional. There is a gear on the back to actually move the waist, but unfortunately, as you can kind of see here, the system piece right here, which is the triangular piece on the pelvis piece right here, actually prevents you from moving this around too much because, sure, I guess you can kind of rotate it like so, but if you rotate it too much, it will just fall off. So I can see why he did it because the exposed pin right there does look very awkward to me, but it definitely kind of does hamper articulation, just a simple system piece being stuck on there. So really, you can't do much with the waist articulation. It's kind of just fixed as it is. In terms of the arms, you can rotate them okay. I think they could have been improved maybe a little bit in terms of articulation because you can't really raise them up too much because of the nature of the way they're mounted. It kind of conflicts with the way the ball joint is mounted here, and you can kind of push them forwards but only straight. If you try to bend this outwards any more than it is, it'll just pop off because if you notice right here, it's mounted on this style of ball joint, which means that while it is well proportioned and definitely does look good, it's very easy to just accidentally pop off. Now, thankfully, the elbow is totally fine. No problems with the elbow articulation. You can move it around any way you want, and the same goes for the hand. That's pretty basic. It's just the upper arm that I've personally had some issues with posing myself. And it gets even worse when this one has a large spike on the top. I do like the asymmetry of it. It definitely does look visually interesting, gives it a more unique flair, but again, you can't do much with this elbow, even less because the big spike is just going to hit things and conflict with things all around it, so you can't even move this piece up forwards without it just breaking like I just did, so that is a little bit unfortunate. Some pieces do break off a little bit if you're not too careful with it here, so let me just get this back on here. And then finally you have the head. So the head is actually done really interestingly because obviously it uses one of the Knights Kingdom helmets here, but it's mounted on one of the G2 heads. And the way this is accomplished is by using LEGO system elements to mount the mask on, and actually has some transparent eye coloring in here. You actually do have a lot of extra detail in the way the head is mounted, specifically because of the pieces used. I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit so you can see a very, very faint, transparent red glow. If I up the brightness all the way, you can see it barely behind the eye right there, the transparent red glow of the system brick. So his eyes do glow, it's cool, and he does have a heart light as well, which is also really interesting to see. And so that basically sums up this model for posability. Outside of the fingers being able to be moved individually, which is pretty basic for a lot of these larger Bionicle MOCs, you can't really pose this outside of the normal range of posability, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. My only major con would be the fact that the arms are kind of awkward to move, and you literally can't raise this arm forward with the back attachment in the way, but all in all, it definitely is pretty well posed. The legs definitely are very good, very stable. You're not going to have any problems with this falling over. And so with that, we can probably move on to building techniques. So in terms of building techniques as a whole, again, this is using some fairly advanced building techniques pretty much all throughout. The only simple thing here is honestly the foot, and I do feel like the foot probably is a little bit too simple, especially given just how complex the rest of this model is. But of course, if you look at the rest of it, it is very, very packed in with all sorts of detail, all around 360 degrees, full range of detail packed all around this character, which is really awesome to see. I love the use of the spiky elements to add some texture to it. Even the Nuvox shields back here really do make it feel like this is cohesive with the rest of the spikes, and the purple highlights being used like the Knights Kingdom armor pieces really do make this feel very cohesive. I also like the usage of the way the torso is built here specifically. I had no idea this was possible as a LEGO building technique. I didn't even realize that they would stay in, but these studs are not actually attached. They are literally just held in by the force of the Knights Kingdom armor here, and they're in pretty tight. I mean, they're not going to fall out. I was very impressed by how that was built because you just don't really see that technique used every day, and definitely it probably required a lot of experimentation to actually get right. Moving onwards, we actually have the upper arms here. It's a great combination of the dark red Vorox armor pieces in conjunction with the Knights Kingdom armor. Really does feel very natural to me. And I do like the usage of the Kalma armor kind of forming around the hand here. Again, the only con in building techniques is the way the shoulders are mounted. Just by using that particular ball joint there does limit articulation somewhat. And of course, one of my favorite pieces used here is the small-scale Fenrir'd skull here, the little dragon skull right there used for the back texturing. It's just a great parts usage to me personally. And ignore this, this is supposed to be the other type. My Bricklink order messed up, and I just didn't have another one on hand, but it does the same thing. So lastly, we probably should talk about one of the stranger things about this model, and that is the back attachment. Now, I have not delved too deep into this storyline. Maybe WombatCombatPictures himself can elucidate a little bit. I always just saw this as some sort of maybe some vortex ring or teleportation ring. I don't know, some cool contraption that he has mounted on his back that really gives him a very otherworldly feel. Or for all I know, maybe it's just supposed to be some sort of decorative feature. Who knows? It just looks really interesting to me. I love the parts usage of the two different Jalurmari armor pieces. They really do look well together. It does look like some sort of formidable mechanism, contraption, I don't know what this is, but it just looks really cool with the spikes and the way that these curve around the inside of this almost portal-like contraption. What's also really cool is that the way this is built is that it can be very easily removed. So you can always just pop this off right here. It's just attached by 2 different Technic pins. You set this aside, and there you go. You have this full character without the larger attachment on his back, and this works out very well as a standard character. You could just not even include this whatsoever, and it just works out totally fine. So I think that's a really great way of this, especially because of how strange this is. I do think it looks cool, but in case it's just personally not your cup of tea, you can always just take it off and set it to the side and have a perfectly good Bionicle-like character right here. And so all in all, the building techniques are very, very good with this. I think in general, this is one of the ones I was most impressed with the torso construction for. I love the way that all these different pieces come together at different angles. Definitely has a larger chest here, kind of tapering downwards to the waist and then going on outwards. The Kalma armor in particular being mounted here really does work very well to me, and it does have a bit of flex, which means that they'll snap back to their original position, but they can be kind of moved outwards a little bit, which is achieved by using a very clever combination of bars and different Technic pieces that I will not spoil because it is a fantastic building technique. Even moving on to the back here with the back armor removed, it does all come together very well, feels very armored up, and again, super, super simple just to attach the back attachment. Just take the 2 pins, plug them back in. It's almost like attaching an Avmatoran to his back, except just so much cooler. And so we can probably move on to overall aesthetics for this model. Now, I will admit, this does have a very basic color scheme. The black and dark red is a color scheme we've seen probably 1,000 times before. It's not necessarily something new, but I think it does the job okay, and it definitely gets the point across. One thing I really do like about this model are the purple highlights, which really do make it stand out from just being a standard black and dark red armored character. The purple definitely adds a lot of character to this model and really does make it stand out in terms of having a pretty unique color scheme, or at least a unique accent color. And speaking of the distribution of the color scheme and how this works, I'm very happy with the way this all blends together. The usage of the Kalma armor pieces, which are dual molded or kind of co-injection marble molded from the black leading up to the dark red, really do make the colors pop on this model. I love the tapering from the black waist all the way to the dark red tips here, and the reverse is done exactly for the upper legs and even the arms right here. So all in all, just a fantastically detailed character, and of course the centerpiece of it all is the molded, marbled, dark red and black Vladek mask from Knight's Kingdom. That really ties this all together and really almost makes it look like it was made for this character, just because of the different colors of the black and dark red being actually all fully molded for this particular person. So that all works really great. Now, in terms of the other parts of the aesthetics of this model, I'm also very happy with just the proportions in general. It has fairly standard proportions, but it all comes together very well. It's a very formidable figure, as you can see right here, and I'm just overall extremely pleased with how this all came together. And so, it's probably now time to compare this against some representative samples from the Bionicle universe. I have with me Toa Norik, my usual companion piece right here, and you can see right here that the Great Being is just a little bit larger than Toa Norik. He's not even a head taller like some of the other WCP Great Beings. He's just a little taller than a Toa, just a lot more armored up, and really does feel like something unique. In comparison, talking about how he appears as a Great Being, I think one of the coolest things about this character is the large ring on the top really does feel like some sort of otherworldly contraption or some sort of strange alien-like device that definitely sets it apart from some of the other Bionicle characters. And again, some attempts were made to actually make this seem somewhat organic. You have a lot of more smoother curved pieces going in here, and it definitely does feel like something that is completely unique and separate from the standard Bionicle world that we know and love. Honestly, this is probably one of the Great Beings that works the best for me in terms of actually looking somewhat otherworldly, but not too organic and not too crazy to not fit in the Bionicle universe. It kind of hits that sweet spot in fitting in fairly well with other Bionicle characters and having a very, very unique face, because again, he's not wearing a Kanohi, he's a Great Being after all. And so let's just take a look at this model in terms of summing up all of the total points. So first of all, in terms of the overall believability in universe, I'm probably going to give this model an 8 out of 10. I think it generally fits in fairly well. It's not necessarily how I would have imagined the Great Beings looking. Maybe it looks a little bit too much like a villain for my liking, especially because a lot of the Great Beings were just supposed to be fairly benevolent creators. But I think it does get the point across. It gets the mystery of the Great Beings across very well, and I'm very happy with how it all ends up, especially with the Vladik mask. You really feel like his face is shrouded in darkness here, giving the character an air of mystery, which the Great Beings totally should have, because they are mysterious characters. Moving on, though, we can talk about the posability. Now, of course, the legs I'm very happy with. You can really articulate the legs fully. You can get this into all sorts of good positions, all sorts of different stuff you can do with the legs. So the legs are fantastic. Lots of friction. You can really have this working very well, so the legs are all great. The arms, unfortunately, are not great to me, specifically because of the way they're mounted. Moving the arm forward really stresses the hinge a little bit. You're kind of forcing it to move forwards and pop out of the ball joint a little bit. With the back attachment in, you can't even move this other arm upwards at all, and then that could cause some stuff to fall apart if you really try to force it. So his arms kind of just have to be just straight down like this, which honestly is a little unfortunate to me personally. Again, though, the head I'm pretty happy with. It does kind of hit the back here, especially with the back attachment mounted, but if you take it off, that's not really a problem. And I am very impressed with just how posable this character is for being such a large and detailed MOC. And so for posability, I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. My only major complaint is that you can't really move the arms forward that easily, but beyond that, everything else is pretty perfect. You just kind of have to have his arms leaning down like this. And so, with that, we can move on to the next point, which is overall building techniques. So as with most Wombat Combat Pictures MOCs, this has absolutely out-of-this-world building techniques. If you haven't built one of his MOCs before, I would highly, highly recommend it. Just using pieces in ways I never would have imagined, blending different methods of LEGO system, construction, Knight's Kingdom. All sorts of different LEGO building styles go into this and really do make it feel like a cohesive model, which is the most impressive thing about combining all these disparate systems. Again, the only complaint that I do have is just the way the arms are mounted. Feel like that could have been improved somewhat, but overall, I'm very happy with the general building techniques for this model, and so I'm going to give building techniques an 8 out of 10 as a whole. And with that, we can move on to the final point, which is overall aesthetics. Now, aesthetically speaking, I think the purple definitely does this a lot of good, because otherwise the color scheme would be fairly overused and honestly not too interesting to me personally. But adding in the purple definitely saves the color scheme a lot, because this gives it a lot of very good accent colors despite having the standard quote-unquote villain color scheme of dark red and black. This definitely feels like some alien technology, something completely foreign to the world of Bionicle, with the circular piece mounted on his back there. That, I think, is such a cool thing to have, really gives it a unique silhouette, makes the builder wonder, what is this? Like, what is this contraption? Is this just some sort of a marking that signifies where he's from? Maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's technology. You can kind of go wild with your imagination with what that's supposed to represent. I know WCP definitely has an official story behind what that is supposed to be, but personally as a builder, I just kind of like imagining what it could be and coming up with different scenarios in terms of what that actually could be. So aesthetically speaking, it is a color scheme that's tried and true, but there's a reason why it is, because it is a good looking color scheme. It's just something we've kind of seen before. So aesthetics is going to get a 7 out of 10. Everything else is perfect, maybe somewhat repetitive color scheme from what we've seen before, but everything else is really fantastic. And again, the purple really saves this model. And so, with that, we have summed up our review of the Great Being of Conflict, Heremus, right here, one of Wombat Combat Pictures' best MOCs. I really love the way that this all comes together. What a fantastic build for a character, what an interesting build, and definitely one of the more intricate builds he's ever done, and one that I really enjoyed putting together. And so, if you're interested in getting instructions for this, do check out Wombat Combat Pictures' Patreon, which I have linked below. He's really generous with his instructions. I really only had to pay $1 to access all of them at the cheapest Patreon tier, so that's absolutely fantastic. I love that, and it's really great because he makes it accessible for a lot of people who want to build these to be able to make it themselves. Of course, stay tuned to Duck Breaks for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. Be sure to subscribe to see more Bionicle Fanon MOC reviews like like these coming out every single Monday unless otherwise stated. And thank you all so much for tuning in. I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.